Hey guys, it's Zerx What If, and welcome back to part 3 of What If Yuji was like all for one. Continuing where we left off, Yuji would have entered the innate domain and gotten himself ready to fight the cursed spirit that was in front of him. Yuji said that he was going to make this fast and absorb the technique that was inside of the cursed spirit, and he would attempt to do exactly that. But before Yuji could get the chance to do anything, the curse would already be rushing towards him. Using blood manipulation, it would begin to use convergence, jumping at Yuji while clapping its hands together. Yuji would be taken off guard by how fast the curse was moving, but it wouldn't stop him. Just as the curse would be about to shoot off a piercing blood, Yuji would use the reversal anti-gravity technique, causing the curse to crash into the ground, dispersing its piercing blood attack. Yuji would be about to land his hand on top of the curse to finish it off. However, just before he got the chance, another curse would swoop in, attempting to grab onto Yuji. Yuji would dodge out of the way and look to where the curse was. He would realize it would be Mahito, the same curse that was arguing with him when he was with Kenjaku. Yuji would begin to laugh. He didn't realize Mahito had the guts in order to do something like this, but he was all for it. Mahito was simply another pawn to Yuji, someone he could use later on down the line. While still holding the other curse with his anti-gravity technique, he would begin to ask Mahito some questions. He would ask Mahito, what exactly does he think he's going to accomplish here? Yuji knew that he was way stronger than Mahito, so there was no need for him to take him seriously at all. He didn't understand Mahito's logic and why he would attempt to ambush him here. However, before Mahito could say a word to Yuji, Jogo and Hanami would appear, with Jogo telling Yuji that they told Mahito not to go ahead like this. Yuji would smile and ask all of them, are they here to kill him or just get in his way? Just then, the curse that Yuji was holding with his anti-gravity reversal technique would begin to let out a blood-curdling scream, causing all of the cursed spirits to cover their ears besides Yuji. It would have created numerous convergence orbs in the air, with all of them beginning to fly towards Yuji. As the blood would get near Yuji, Yuji would notice that the convergence orbs were bubbling, and the second they got near Yuji, they would explode. This would throw Yuji a little off guard, causing him to release his reversal technique, freeing the curse, allowing it to get up. Just then, the same curse would go over with the other curses, standing back over towards them. This is when Yuji would realize what was going on. He would ask all of them what their issue was and why they wanted to kill him, with the curses saying that they were going to extract Sukuna's fingers from inside of him, or force him to make his fingers into cursed objects like Sukuna did, in order to gain a new vessel for Sukuna. They would feed some of the original fingers to a host itself, and then use the rest of the fingers from Yuji in order to make sure Sukuna was able to get stronger. Yuji would laugh and call all of the curses idiots. If they wanted to fight him, all they had to do was ask earlier, instead of waiting all this time. Yuji would tell the curses that he would have been happy to kill them and extract their techniques for himself. But then again, he would tell the curses that he doesn't want to fight them, not yet at least. This fight would have to wait until Satoru Gojo had been sealed. The new world that they seek to create would not be possible as long as he was around. They could kill Yuji, sure, but as long as Gojo was alive and kicking, the age of curses will never come. Jogo would kiss his teeth, realizing that Yuji could potentially be correct. They could kill Yuji here, sure, but without the manpower that Yuji himself has, will they actually be able to take on Satoru Gojo? Yuji is essential to their plan in order to create the new world. No matter how much they hate him, they still need him. However, Mahito wasn't hearing any of it. He wanted Yuji to die, and they were going to revive the actual Sukuna, not some brat that Kenjaku had cooked up. Jogo would then tell Mahito that even if they did fight Yuji here, there's no guaranteed chance that they will win this fight. Mahito would say that there were 4 of them and 1 of Yuji. They would easily be able to take him on, especially if he wasn't someone like Gojo. However, Jogo would tell Mahito to look at Yuji and ask him, does he look even the slightest bit worried? Mahito would look over and see Yuji doing nothing but simply smiling. Mahito would then speak up and tell Yuji he's going to offer him a deal. Yuji would tell Mahito that he was intrigued and that he was listening. Mahito would tell Yuji that if he were able to beat both him and the blood curse, he would be able to take both of their techniques and consume the fingers that were inside of the blood curse spirit. However, if Mahito and the spirit were to lose, he would at least promise him this, that he at least makes the new world happen along with Jogo and Hanami. However, if Yuji was to lose, Yuji would give up the fingers that he had consumed already in order for Sukuna to reawaken himself. Yuji would smile, knowing what Mahito's technique was. He had wanted Mahito's technique since the first time he saw him, but he couldn't do anything since Kenjaku said he had needed him. But if Yuji had the technique, everything would still be okay. This was Yuji's lucky day. He was going to be getting 2 fingers, a blood manipulation curse technique, and Mahito's technique. Yuji would begin to smile ear to ear. He would tell Mahito that he agrees on his offer, and that if he wins, he promises that he'll help both Jogo and Hanami make the new world happen. Jogo would tell Mahito that this was pointless and unneeded. However, Mahito would tell Jogo to leave it alone. Mahito would then tell Jogo and Hanami to leave and just to wait at the base where Kenjaku was. Whenever everything was over, they'd know who won or not. Jogo would tell Mahito that this was stupid and to try not to get himself killed. Him and Hanami would then prepare to take their leave. As Yuji would let off another sinister smile, he couldn't wait to take Mahito's technique. He had already thought he was getting a bonus with the blood manipulation. However, being able to take auto transfiguration from Mahito will be an even bigger bonus. As Jogo and Hanami would leave, Yuji would ask Mahito, what is he waiting for? The blood cursed spirit would begin to snarl, as Mahito would tell Yuji that he better get ready, because Mahito wasn't going to hold anything back. He was ready to die here, along with all of his ideals. Mahito would begin to rush in at Yuji, with the blood cursed spirit beginning to use conversions and clapping his hands together. Just then, Yuji would use hand signs, summoning the giant snake. It would rush out of his shadow, attempting to crash right into Mahito. However, Mahito would jump right over the snake and begin to clash with Yuji. Yuji would smile and use his anti-gravity technique, launching Mahito into the air. He would then turn his hand into a spear, cutting it off at the same time. He would grab his hand spear with his other arm, activating his explosion technique onto it. Just then, Yuji would hear piercing blood coming from the blood cursed spirit. But before the piercing blood could go off, Yuji's snake would wrap around, crashing into the blood cursed spirit, slamming him into a wall. Yuji would then take the spear he had imbued with his exploding technique and throw it up at Mahito. It would strike Mahito right in the chest, as Yuji would point up into the air, causing the spear to explode. Mahito would be blown into multiple little pieces. However, Mahito was going to attempt to use this to his advantage. He would turn each one of his pieces into a miniature him, causing them to be spread out all throughout the innate domain. At the same time, the blood cursed spirit would then use slicing exorcism to slice directly through the snake, causing the Shikigami to be desummoned. As there would be a bunch of mini Mahitos running around, Yuji couldn't figure out which one was the real Mahito. Being distracted by the mini Mahitos, it was the perfect setup for the blood cursed spirit. It would fire off a piercing blood that would jet straight towards Yuji. However, Yuji this time would barely realize that it was coming. He would attempt to block it with one of his arms. However, it would then begin to pierce into his arm. Yuji, feeling the blood piercing through his arm, would begin to deflect the attack. However, just from behind him, Mahito would strike him in the back, luckily landing a black flash onto Yuji. Yuji would be sent forward into the blood cursed spirit, as the spirit would then activate flowing red scale stack, throwing a punch directly towards Yuji. However, just before Yuji would be caught by the punch, he would catch himself, ducking underneath a swing, hitting a wall, landing on his feet. He would then use his explosion technique, blowing up the wall and jumping off of it at the same time. Using the technique for more momentum, he would rocket straight towards the blood cursed spirit, tackling the spirit, crashing it into the ground. Yuji would then again use his anti-gravity technique reversal. He would then jump into the air using hand signs to summon Max Elephant, along with combining his anti-gravity technique reversal with it, summoning the elephant from a high altitude to crash onto the blood spirit. He would desummon the Shikigami using anti-gravity technique reversal on himself, crashing down into the blood cursed spirit. Mahito, seeing this, would attempt to try to gain another attack off on Yuji. However, Yuji would see him this time, sending dismantles his way yet again, slashing Mahito in two. Yuji would then bend down, activating his innate technique, using it on the blood manipulation curse, absorbing both of Sukuna's fingers, plus the soul that had blood manipulation. He would then smile and look at Mahito, who was on the floor trying to recover from the slash. Since Yuji was able to perceive the soul, it was hard for Mahito to not take any kind of damage from him. Mahito would have recovered, but by the time he had recovered, Yuji had already downloaded the information from the other technique into his brain. Wanting to use his new technique right away, he would activate convergence, making a blood orb right in front of him. He would then clap onto the orb and say piercing blood, as the blood would jet out straight towards Mahito, piercing him directly in the chest. Yuji would then pull his hands up, causing the piercing blood to split Mahito in two yet again. As Mahito would drop to the floor, Yuji would sigh. He would ask Mahito if this was really worth it. Mahito, reforming himself, would tell Yuji everything he does is calculated and worth it. He doesn't want a lecture from a brat like him. Yuji would then walk over to Mahito and touch him on the neck, telling Mahito that if this is how he wanted to die, then so be it. He would begin to use his innate technique on Mahito. However, nothing would happen. Yuji would be confused, as just then, from behind Yuji, another Mahito would strike Yuji in the back, cracking him with a black flash. Mahito would laugh and ask Yuji, did he really think he was that stupid? Did he really think that he was going to let himself get caught and lose that easily to someone like him? Yuji must have been out of his mind. Mahito would tell Yuji that he didn't put everything on the line for a reason. He's fighting for a cause, while Yuji is simply fighting for fun. The two black flashes from Mahito would cause a sudden awakening inside of his soul. He didn't need a domain. He just needed something that was going to be able to kill Yuji right here and now. Mahito would then put his hands over his face, transferring his body into something that he's never done before. His soul cried out for the power in order to defeat Yuji, and the two black flashes allowed him to do so. As the violent transformation would end, Mahito would have armor all around his body, but he would look more slim. He would have hand-like wings coming out of his back as well. Mahito would tell Yuji that he better get ready because he wasn't going to be holding anything back. Mahito would tell Yuji that he was going to transform him into one of his strongest transfigured humans. As Yuji would smile and begin to laugh and say that this is exactly what he wanted, he's thankful that Mahito wasn't going to go down this easily. They would both begin to rush in at each other. However, Yuji would be caught off guard by Mahito's sudden increase in speed. Before Yuji could even blink, Mahito was already in front of him, throwing a punch straight towards Yuji's face. It would connect, cracking Yuji right across the jaw. Yuji would yet again be caught off guard by the sudden increase of strength as well. It was as if Mahito's speed and strength had increased tenfold. Mahito would then swing with his left, cracking Yuji across the face again. He would grab Yuji and knee him in the stomach, taking one of his arms and throwing him into a wall. Yuji would crash into the wall, but he was already prepared. Just as he hit the wall, he would use hand signs, summoning gravity escape, making sure they were imbued with his explosion technique. He would send them towards Mahito. However, as the rapids would begin to rush towards Mahito, he would sprint straight through them, with the wind pressure from his speed causing all of the rapids to explode. Yuji would begin to smile as Mahito would be right in front of him again, cracking Yuji in the stomach, causing Yuji to cough up blood. Yuji, however, wouldn't falter from this. He would begin to use anti-gravity reversal. As Mahito would begin to feel the weight, it wouldn't slam him down as it did before, but he was still barely able to move within it. Yuji would then swing his fist, cracking Mahito in the face. Using blood manipulation, he would then begin to use flowing red scale, increasing his speed and strength as well. He would begin to combo Mahito. He would send a left hook, as Mahito would take the brunt of the attack, sending a left of his own. They would both crack each other across the face, sending each other backwards. Just as they both would do so, Yuji would then use convergence again. While activating his explosion technique onto the blood, he would clap his hands onto the convergence orb, as Mahito would take a stance, both of them waiting for the other to make a move. Mahito would be the first one though. He would rush in as fast as he could, with Yuji noticing and sending a piercing blood directly at Mahito. However, the speed of the piercing blood was faster than Mahito thought it was going to be. Mahito would just barely dodge out of the way, getting nicked on his arm. However, that's when Yuji would point at Mahito's arm. Just then, the blood that struck Mahito's arm would explode, causing Mahito's arm to be blown off. Yuji would then rush in, but Mahito was already ready for Yuji. He would regenerate his arm, sending a palm directly towards Yuji. He would touch Yuji and attempt to use Idle Transfiguration, but something weird would happen. Mahito felt Idle Transfiguration work on Yuji. However, the soul that Yuji had collected that allowed him to change his hands into weapons would have completely vanished from his body. Yuji would feel this and realize Mahito is a direct counter to his innate technique. Mahito's ability to be able to reshape the soul was counteracting Yuji's ability to be able to store the souls inside of his body. With Mahito using Idle Transfiguration to try to rapidly disform his soul, it would effectively destroy the soul inside of Yuji's body. Yuji, feeling the soul and technique be stripped from his body, would immediately realize that Mahito is a problem. If Mahito was able to touch him again, he could potentially destroy every last one of the souls that he has inside of his body. Yuji was able to protect his own innate soul, but the other ones he wasn't able to protect. Yuji knew that he had to lock in, otherwise all of his techniques would be gone by the end of this fight. Mahito and Yuji would push off of each other and begin to stare each other down. Yuji would look at Mahito with an absolutely concentrated face. He would not allow Mahito to touch him ever again. He doesn't want to risk losing Sukuna's technique or the anti-gravity technique. Mahito would let off a sinister smile and ask Yuji, where's his smile at? He thought Yuji was having fun. Yuji would then proceed to activate Flowing Red Scale Stack, not saying a single thing, rushing in at Mahito. Mahito would begin to laugh, rushing in at Yuji as well. Mahito would swing his hand, attempting to touch Yuji again. However, Yuji would sidestep the attack, grabbing onto Mahito's arm and using cleave. It would blow off Mahito's arm, as Mahito would attempt to swing with his other. Yuji would duck underneath it, sweeping Mahito's leg. As Mahito would fall to the ground, Yuji would kick Mahito in the chest, sending him flying backwards. Just then, Yuji would use hand signs, summoning Nue, infusing the bird with his anti-gravity technique. Nue would swoop over and strike Mahito, causing him to float in the air. Yuji would then make another pair of hand signs, summoning Max Elephant above where Mahito was, imbuing Max Elephant with the anti-gravity reversal technique. As Mahito was floating through the air, he wouldn't be able to dodge this attack. The elephant would land on top of Mahito at a crushing speed, slamming him into the ground, cracking majority of his armor. Just then, Max Elephant would be desummoned, as Yuji would be above Mahito, already falling down, using anti-gravity reversal on himself. Mahito would attempt to get up, but it was far too late. Yuji would crash down on top of Mahito, caving his chest in, as well as hitting him with a black flash. This attack would destroy Mahito's armor completely, while also putting a hole through Mahito's chest. Yuji would then stare down at Mahito and ask him, was he still having fun? Because he is. Mahito would begin to laugh and attempt to touch Yuji, but Yuji would jump into the air, as Mahito would begin to regenerate his stomach. Mahito would begin to laugh again, as Yuji would be standing across from him. He would ask Mahito what's so funny, as Mahito would be thinking to himself that he only has one more chance, one more gamble, as that last attack nearly killed him. He would tell Yuji that he has one more thing. Mahito would lock eyes with Yuji. Just then, he would open his mouth and say domain expansion. However, Yuji would simply say no, sending a bunch of slashes towards Mahito, using dismantle over and over, before Mahito even had the chance to actually put his domain up. The cuts weren't meant to go through Mahito, they were simply meant to stop him from activating his domain, causing enough damage to where Yuji will still be able to extract the technique from Mahito. Mahito would be on the ground, still smiling. He would tell Yuji that he had a fun fight, even though he was only recently born. He experienced so much as a curse, and especially from this fight. He would tell Yuji to make sure that he keeps his vow, as Mahito's soul will now be bounded to him. Yuji would tell Mahito to shut up and to give him his technique, understanding that he knows he has to uphold his end of the vow with Mahito. He would activate his innate technique, grabbing Mahito by the neck, and begin to absorb Mahito's soul, taking idle transfiguration for himself. Yuji would look down at his hands and take a deep breath. He would think back on what Mahito had said earlier to him, about how he was only fighting for fun, as Mahito was fighting for a cause. Yuji couldn't understand or wrap his head around it. Yuji had always felt as if he was following a script in his life, something that someone else had wrote for him. Yuji could feel deep down that he was never really in control. However, after this fight with Mahito, it would all come full circle. It was all simply for fun for Yuji. Sure, he was following what Kenjaku wanted him to do, but was that really what Yuji wanted to do? Before he would go back to where his hideout was, he would ponder on this one thought alone. Kenjaku wanted to make a new world, but where would Yuji sit when this new world was created? Once everything done, would Kenjaku simply throw Yuji aside, or would he allow Yuji to sit at the top? Yuji didn't know exactly what Kenjaku had planned. Kenjaku barely told him anything anyway. He only told Yuji what he needed to hear in the moment. Not wanting to get too deep in his own mental, Yuji would shake these thoughts away for now. He would simply return back to his hideout. Jogo, Dagon, and Hanami would see Yuji walking through the doors and understand what had happened. Kenjaku would ask Yuji where Mahito was. Yuji would point to his hands and tell Kenjaku that he absorbed Mahito. Kenjaku would give Yuji a serious look. He would ask Yuji if he was able to use idle transfiguration like Mahito did. Yuji would stare back at Kenjaku and tell him, should he test it out on him? With Kenjaku taking a step back, however, Yuji would let off a smile and say that he was just kidding. He would tell Kenjaku that he's able to use it properly, so there's nothing he needs to worry about. They need to focus more on their plan on how to capture Satoru Gojo. Kenjaku would let off a nervous laugh and tell Yuji that they need to do exactly that. Kenjaku would tell the group that on October 31st, they would put a veil over Shibuya, attracting the Jujutsu sorcerers and hoping that Gojo falls for the bait. They would take hostage of multiple civilians and demand that Satoru Gojo would come forth. He would say that he needed Yuji, Jogo, and Hanami in order to distract Gojo while he gets the prison realm prepared. Jogo and Hanami would ask Kenjaku how long do they need to stall out the monster for, with Kenjaku telling them that they need to stall him for at least 1 minute. Yuji would tell Kenjaku that he doesn't need Jogo or Hanami to help him. He would stall Gojo for 1 minute himself. If anything, the other two can go around causing havoc in Shibuya. Kenjaku would tell Yuji that he shouldn't put himself at risk like that. Yuji would tell Kenjaku that he doesn't need to worry about him. Yuji would tell the group that he will take care of Gojo Satoru alone. He would tell Kenjaku to get the prison realm ready, and that before the 31st happens, he has some things he needs to prepare. He would tell all of the cursed spirits and Kenjaku to not bother him until the 31st. Yuji would remember that he has one more summon that he needs to tame in the 10 Shadows technique, and with his current abilities, he's positive that he'll be able to tame this one. Kenjaku would then tell Yuji that after they seal Satoru Gojo, Kenjaku would need Yuji's help in order to find Tengen. Yuji would ask who that was, with Kenjaku simply telling Yuji that Tengen was someone who maintains balance in the world. He would tell Yuji that they need help finding them in order to throw the world out of balance. And when everything is said and done, Yuji can become the new king of curses. Yuji would stare at Kenjaku, realizing that he still wasn't telling him everything. But he wouldn't press Kenjaku at all. He would simply tell Kenjaku that he was going to help him find Tengen. But deep inside of Yuji's mind, he couldn't help but still think on what Mahito was saying to him and what he was thinking about earlier. Who exactly was Kenjaku? He knows Kenjaku gave birth to him. However, whatever Kenjaku was, it wasn't the woman that raised him. Kenjaku was something, and Yuji wanted answers. Yuji wanted to know what his role was in everything. Where did he actually stand within all of this? Was he actually meant to be the new king of curses, or was he simply a pawn playing in the palm of Kenjaku's hands? Yuji would find everything out. Even if not now, he would figure it out eventually. Yuji wasn't stupid. He would think to himself and tell himself that Satoru Gojo probably knows a lot about Jujutsu Society or what's going on within it. When they interact with each other, Yuji would simply ask Gojo about everything and ask him if he knows about Kenjaku, although Gojo might not exactly talk to him. Yuji would scratch his head and say that he may have messed up. He would take a deep breath and smack himself with both of his hands, attempting to get himself out of his head. The only thing Yuji could confirm for certain is that he was destined for greatness. Yuji would tell himself that he wasn't going to follow the rules of anybody anymore. He was going to do things according to how he wanted to do them. After they seal Satoru Gojo, Yuji was going to take control of everything, and he would make absolutely sure of it. As a week would pass, Yuji would still be training his abilities. He would then believe it was finally time to summon his final Shikigami in order to attempt to tame him. Yuji would make hand signs and take a deep breath. He would then proceed to say, "With this treasure I summon 8-handled sword divergent Scylla Divine General Maharaga." As wolves and frogs will begin to stand around him, the wolves will begin to howl, and the frogs will begin to bleat. Maharaga would stand tall behind Yuji. Yuji would look up straight at the beast. As without a second wasted, Maharaga would immediately swing down onto Yuji. Yuji would catch its fist and use Dismantle on the beast, slicing it numerous times in the chest. However, the beast wouldn't stagger and simply swing again. He would strike Yuji in the chest, sending him backwards quite a bit. Yuji would then activate Flowing Red Scale and begin to use conversions. Maharaga would jump directly towards Yuji, attempting to strike him again, but Yuji was prepared, hardening the blood around his hand. He would make blood-like gauntlets, blocking the strike from Maharaga, placing his hand on Maharaga's chest and proceeding to use Cleave. Maharaga's chest would get sliced open again, but all of a sudden, Yuji would hear a clicking sound. He would look up and see the wheel on Maharaga's head begin to turn. Yuji would raise his eyebrow at this, but he couldn't take his eyes off the fight. Maharaga had seemingly regenerated his entire body and would rush at Yuji again. He would pick up one of the trees that were near him and throw it at Yuji. Yuji would use Cleave on the tree, slicing it into two, as Maharaga would be right behind the tree, throwing another punch, hitting Yuji directly in the face. Yuji would take the attack head on, punching Maharaga in the face himself. He would then begin to combo Maharaga. Maharaga would swing its right, however Yuji would duck underneath it, taking his right and hitting Maharaga in the stomach. Maharaga would attempt to swing backwards with his right hand again. However, Yuji would catch it, swinging over Maharaga's arm and kicking him in the face, sending him into some trees. Yuji would then send more slashes directly towards Maharaga, cutting the entire top half of his body into smithereens. However, yet again, the wheel on Maharaga's head would begin to turn. Yuji would kiss his teeth as he would see Maharaga regenerating itself again. This fight was a lot harder than he thought it was going to be. instantly. Mahoraga would rush in, but this time seemingly faster than he was before. But Yuji would use his anti-gravity technique reversal, slamming him into the ground. Yuji would then use convergence, putting a bunch of blood orbs above Mahoraga, imbuing his explosion technique inside of the blood. He would then use supernova on the blood, causing the blood to explode, striking Mahoraga on every part of its body. He would then point at Mahoraga, as the blood that had struck Mahoraga would then explode once again, causing a huge explosion to where Mahoraga was laying at. Yuji would believe that he had gotten the beast right then and there, but just then, he would have heard yet another click of Mahoraga's will. As the beast would get up, it would rush directly towards Yuji again. However, yet again, Yuji would use Dismantle, attempting to slice the beast into ribbons. But this time, his slashes were barely doing anything. Mahoraga would immediately regenerate from each slash that Yuji would send at him. Yuji would then realize exactly what Mahoraga was doing. Yuji noticed that every time he sent his slashes and the wheel would turn, his slashes would only get weaker and weaker. He would realize that Mahoraga was adapting to all of his abilities, and he had pretty much used his whole arsenal on the beast. However, there was still one more move that he had yet to use. If this move didn't kill Mahoraga, he would die here. He had already met the requirements. All that's left is to set up the attack itself. Yuji would smile and look at Mahoraga, asking the beast, what is it waiting for? Mahoraga would rush at Yuji, but Yuji would use hand signs, summoning Piercing Ox, imbuing it with his explosion technique. He would send the Ox forward as it would ram into Mahoraga, catching Mahoraga off guard. Yuji would then again use his anti-gravity technique reversal on Mahoraga, slamming the beast into the ground. It wasn't as strong as last time, however, it was enough to hold Mahoraga in place. Just then, Yuji would smile and say that the fight was over. Yuji would take a deep breath and say open. Flames would begin to form in Yuji's hand. Yuji would set up a Divine Flame, saying that he hasn't had any use for this attack yet, but now would be the perfect time. As Mahoraga's wheel would spin, attempting to close the distance on Yuji yet again, Yuji would then let go of the arrow as it would crash into Mahoraga, eviscerating Mahoraga in one fell swoop. Just then, Yuji could feel it, another Shikigami that was added to his arsenal, and this was the strongest one of them all. He was certain with this Shikigami, and knowing what it could do, he could potentially be able to kill Gojo Satoru himself. But that was only a baseless wish. If anything, he wanted to talk to Gojo and figure out things for himself and what he's going to do. He's pretty sure as well, with Mahoraga tamed, even Kenjaku wouldn't be able to stop him. None of the curses would be able to either. Yuji was finally at the pinnacle, and when October 31st came about, he would show the entire Jujutsu Society everything he could do and take over for himself. And I think that's where I'm going to end it off here. I hope you're still enjoying it. Thank you for listening. And also thank you again. Thank you for 2K. I really appreciate all of you. My goodness. I saw it the other day and I was like, what? Because 2K is crazy. But again, thank you. Thank you all from the bottom of my heart. I really appreciate you all. You all are amazing. And shout out to Arise for being an OG. You too, Jen. As well as Illuminati, even though you guys bully him. But yes, thank you all for listening, and I appreciate you. And yeah, peace.